Hey, I'm Leslie Carr, and today I'm going to be interviewing Shubheksha Jalan about making infrastructure more friendly for beginners. Her from front end to infrastructure, her career journey.
Hey everyone, I'm Shubheksha. I am keenly interested in all sorts of problems at the intersection of reliability, scalability, and infrastructure. And I'm here to talk more about how I transitioned from being a front end engineer into the world of infrastructure.
So, on that note, when did you know that you wanted to work in infrastructure?
So a little bit of backstory here. I graduated from college with a computer science degree back in 2017. So I was always interested in computers. The first recollection I have of dealing with computers was back in eighth grade, where I took a very basic algorithms class, which was just like step one start and like add a number, that kind of a thing. And I just got hooked because it was just so different from everything else I was doing at that point in time, because it was just logical. Like you didn't have to mug up anything to sort of pass the exam. You could just go unprepared and like whip stuff out right in the moment and get good scores. So that's why I decided to choose it as my sixth subject, which was optional for the next 2 years. And I started learning Java, and that's when I just fell in love with it. Like the fact that you just type some random words and like you can make a computer do things, like that feeling was absolutely magical. Like the first time I ran a Java program, I still remember how I felt, and I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe that I made that happen. And I think that's what still keeps me here on a lot of days. So that's why I decided to pursue a computer science degree back in India. And during the degree, I was exposed to all sorts of subjects, but some of my favorite subjects throughout my course were focused on systems. I really enjoyed operating systems, compilers, automated theory, all those sorts of subjects. And in one of my final semesters, we had a distributed systems class. It was sort of saved for the end because it was considered to be a more advanced subject. And like when I started attending those classes, that's when I first realized that, this is something that's so fundamental to sort of real world software engineering. And it's just something that you don't think about on a daily basis. Like, how do people actually run these services at this massive scale? Because it's not like a single computer in someone's garage. And up till that point, I was just simply doing like mostly front end stuff. I was dabbling in a lot of things because I was really craving some real world experience. So I was looking into open source. I was learning web development because I thought like that's what people do. Like everyone around me in college was just doing web development or something adjacent to it. Like I did not have anyone like who was doing something interesting in like say compilers or like programming language design or infrastructure. Like I did not have any examples like that. So I started doing the same thing because I just assumed that once I graduate, I'm probably going to work as like a web developer. But when I started taking distributed systems, then I started learning more about like about the existence of this field of like infrastructure and distributed systems. And that's kind of when I was just hooked because like I really enjoyed learning more about the theoretical aspects of it, but I was also really keen to learn like how this stuff is applied in practice. Like something that really fascinated me was the fact that like all the stuff that we are using today and implementing today actually was researched like 2 3 decades ago, and we are just sort of scratching the surface of what people had already sort of predicted in a certain way would happen. And yeah, like there are just so many problems to solve in this space that are super duper exciting and challenging, that it was just something that was right up my alley, and I just got super interested in it. And I realized that I do like front end, but I like this field a lot more.
Oh, that's really great. So, what communities and conferences were really helpful when you were starting out?
So initially, I started out working in open source, like I mentioned previously, but that was mostly front end. And that was mostly like with Mozilla and a bunch of other paid open source programs. So I did this really great program called Outreachy, which is one of the best things that I have done so far in my career. It's like Google Summer of Code, but for underrepresented people in tech. It's a paid 3-month internship program which runs twice a year, and they pair you up with a mentor for an open source project. And it's a great way to sort of build your portfolio and actually contribute to a project that people are using. So that was super helpful. And after that, like once I gained a bit of confidence after doing this internship, I started applying to scholarships, to go to conferences and meet people and trying to expand my network. And as part of that, like initially, since I was doing primarily front end, I applied to a bunch of JavaScript conferences where I got to meet a lot of really nice people. Some of them I am still in touch with and who have gone on to be great allies and mentors for me. After that, while I was still trying to learn more about distributed systems and infrastructure, the whole cloud native space was booming. It was just like, at least that's the first time I heard about it. It was sort of in its infancy. And so that's how I came across like Docker, Kubernetes, and all of these projects in like 2018. And I started looking into that because I thought that would be a great way to learn more. And I'm the kind of person that learns best by doing rather than just reading. So yeah, I just decided to sort of jump right in. And yeah, like a lot of people were super supportive in both the Go and the Kubernetes community. And I also got a chance to go to GopherCon US back in 2017, and I had a great experience there, and the community was so nice and welcoming. Like that's when I decided that yes, like I do want to learn Go and become like an even bigger part of this community and sort of immerse myself in it. And yeah, that's sort of where it started. And I started contributing to Kubernetes and a bunch of other projects in the cloud native space, and went from there.
It's really great. And I'm really glad to hear that the Go and Kubernetes communities were really open and welcoming. I know a lot of open source communities, we want to be open and welcoming, but how can we signal that we're open and welcoming to new engineers?
I think one of the main signifiers of that for me was having a lot of women and other folks from underrepresented communities in visible positions of power, leadership, and that they were well respected. So that was a signal that yeah, like they don't usually mistreat people. And I know this won't be universally true for everyone. Like I'm sure people have had bad experiences even in those communities, but for me personally, like that was definitely one of the main reasons I was attracted to them, and I decided to stick around. And the other thing was that a lot of people that I met and personally know took code of conducts and like violations of that very seriously. So what I see a lot of conferences doing is that they have a code of conduct, but they don't enforce it, which I think is more problematic than not having a code of conduct at all. Because in this case, you're signaling to people that yes, we have your back and you'll be safe in this environment, but you're not actually doing anything to make that happen. So you just give them this false sense of safety, which I think is really, really harmful. And this applies to not just like conferences and like meetups and stuff. It also applies to open source projects. Like open source itself can be very hostile to people from underrepresented groups. So yeah, like just listening to people and actually sort of withholding your code of conduct, I think is super important.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that conferences were a place for you to build your network. Like, how would you recommend someone who's new to the community to network?
So this is something I don't have a lot of actionable points for, to be honest, and I know it seems weird, but like I sort of just accidentally fell into the whole networking space. Like I never set out to network, but it just sort of happened. Like I sort of stumbled into it. And like it's a really funny story. It was actually a lot, like it has a lot to do with open source. So I had a not very great experience in one of the open source communities that I was working with, and I don't know why, but I decided to write down about it. Like obviously I did not expect anyone to read it or anything like to come off of it. I just wrote it on Medium and sort of just put it out there, and it got picked up by like some really prominent people in the open source community, and one of them was Dan Abramov, the creator of React and Redux. So yeah, so basically he sort of tagged me in it, and up until that point I just had like an anonymous Twitter profile, and I was just sort of like being a typical teenager, lost in my own world listening to emo music. And at that point of time I had to decide like what do I need to do, and I didn't even have my name attached to my Twitter profile. So at that point of time I decided that yes, like I'm gonna actually sort of reveal who I am. It sounds dramatic. And yeah, I kind of just went from there. And like since then, I've made a lot of amazing friends from Twitter. Like I think the majority of my friend circle at this point is actually people I met online. And yeah, so not just from like a professional standpoint, like even from a personal standpoint, it has had a massive positive impact overall on my career. So yeah, like in terms of like networking, I just like I followed people I liked and whose work I was interested in, and I was just a decent human being. Like I don't know why this needs to be said, but like people on the internet can just be so wild. Like I constantly think and say that people really underestimate the power of just being a decent human being. Like that's sort of what I have been doing all these years. Like yeah, you consistently follow people and their work, you interact with them, and that's how you build relationships. Like there is no like handbook for that. Like I can't give you like a 10-step process to do that, but that's kind of how it worked in my case, and it has really benefited me a lot. Like there have been countless opportunities that I have come across because of that network that I built early on, completely by accident.
I really love your point about people underestimating the power of just being a good human being.
Yep.
Yeah, so what are a few concrete steps that someone who's new and interested in the infrastructure field can take right now?
I think the most important thing would be to sort of educate yourself as much as possible. I know it's a hard problem because it's a chicken and egg problem. That's how I like to view it. Because to work in an infrastructure job, you need prior experience. And to gain experience, you actually need a job because it's really hard to learn this stuff beyond a certain point on your own. Like there's only so much you can do on a single machine. So what I did was I learned as much as I could on my own. Uh, right after my first job out of college, I was still learning a lot of stuff on my own. I was putting a lot of extra time, and I completely recognize that that's a privilege that not everyone has. So I was really fortunate to have like no dependents and all of that extra time to be able to do that in on top of having a day job. So yeah, so that's what I did. And at some point I just realized that, like I'm spending so much time on this like outside of my job, that I should probably just get a job that pays me to do this on their time. So yeah, so I went from there. Like I was super scared when I was leaving my first job, because I was just like why would anyone hire me? Like I don't have any experience on paper related to infrastructure, and I don't really know what I'm doing. Like why would anyone hire me? The concrete steps that I took before like I started interviewing, and when I decided that yes, I do want a job in this field, was I read a lot about it. Like I wanted to learn anything and everything that I could find. So I was constantly consuming lots and lots of literature, ranging all the way from like papers, like blog posts, talks. Something I started doing early on, which really helped me, was sort of digesting papers by myself. So like reading a paper and then writing a summary on it, like something like the morning paper. And that was really helpful. And then watching talks, talking to more people who were working in this field. And the other big thing that helped me a lot was contributing to open source and sort of building a profile that way. So I did not have anything to do with Go at my day job, but I was learning that on the side, and I was actually applying it by working on these open source projects, which was really helpful so that people could see that, yes, like she's not doing this right now as a full-time job, but she's really interested and she's put all this effort into learning things on her own time, which I think was super useful.
Yeah. So you mentioned that big, scary step about really applying for infrastructure jobs. How did you decide which jobs to apply for your first new position?
I think I focused a lot on culture. Like I wanted to work somewhere where I knew that like they would invest in growing me. I was just 1 year out of college, so I did not have a lot of experience on paper. So that's why I wanted to make sure like that my expectations are clear in terms of what I would need for my own growth. So I made it clear that yes, I would require mentorship because I'm fairly early in my career, and this is the first time I would be doing something like this. So yeah, so culture was definitely the main thing. The other thing I did focus on a little bit was the tech stack. I was already learning Go at that point. I really liked the community as well, so I kind of wanted to stick around it to make sure that like it wasn't too big a transition. And the other thing I wanted to do was actually move out of India. So my first job was back in India, but towards the end of it, I was completely convinced after multiple trips to Europe that, yeah, I definitely do want to move out. So I just set myself a goal, like basically a bunch of criteria, which was that shouldn't be in India, should have something to do with Go, should not be related to front end, and should have a strong emphasis on culture. And that's how I went about it and started searching for different jobs.
Yeah. Ooh, I mean, switching both your countries and your field of work at the same time is a pretty big step. What advice would you give to someone else looking to do the same thing?
Oh, yeah, it was really scary. Like when I think about it now, I don't know what I was thinking or like what had gotten into me, because I had a lot of people telling me that, are you sure about this? Like, are you sure you want to do this now? And like I did have moments where I was like, yeah, maybe I should look for another job within front end and then like switch laterally or something like that. But then I was just like, no, I'm not enjoying this. Like, it's just not worth it. So yeah, I just went for it. The main advice that I would like to give here is that it seems really hard, trust me, and it seems impossible, but it is very much doable. I actually wrote a whole blog post on this topic as well because I got so many questions from people wanting to do something similar, either both or at least like just move out. That yeah, I just combined all the things that I had to say into a blog post. So yeah, it's just like hang in there. A lot of it is just about perseverance. Like it's a lengthy process to find a job, to interview, especially when you're in a different time zone, and then to sort of get an offer and actually make all the visa stuff happen, because that's also a massive, massive time sink. So yeah, it's just a lengthy process and you have to be patient, and it will happen ultimately.
And I'm really glad that it happened for you.
Me
Um,
too.
so, you're talking about interviewing at new companies. A lot of SRE interviews are really aimed at engineers that already have a lot of experience in the field. What what should interviewers do when we're talking to junior people or people who are just switching into this field?
So something that I noticed a lot while I was trying to find a job was how hard it is to find like any sort of entry level positions in this field. Like everyone wants SREs, everyone wants people who already like know something about infrastructure, but nobody wants to actually put in the effort to train people. So like you will just not see like any entry level listings, and that was really bizarre because like even for like front end back end, like you do find like some listings, but it was just not there for infrastructure at all. So that was really, really weird to me. And like the more I dug into it, the more I realized that, yeah, people just don't want to hire and train people. They just want people like to have 5 years of experience and just come in and get started. And like they're probably wasting a lot of energy and resources trying to find that pool of talent because it's super narrow, and not considering that, yes, it might just be cheaper to hire someone and actually invest in them. So yeah, this is something I learned along the way. Like I have no idea that this was the case. So at some point I was just hoping that someone would take a chance on me and give me an opportunity that would let me do this. Yeah, so like I am a big believer of like not doing whiteboarding, or at least in the traditional sense that you're not there to like trick someone. The interviews that I enjoyed the most and performed best in were conversational. It can be about anything, like technical or non-technical, like system design interviews or like pair programming. All of those interviews are like interviews that genuinely make you feel like the other person wants to get the best out of you rather than the worst, which is what like a lot of whiteboarding interviews can feel like. So I feel like it's kind of like similar to when we say that if you're hiring someone to work in a particular language, it's not important that they should know that language itself. It's just that they have a general ability to problem solve. Like that's what we're looking for. It's easy to teach people languages or like technologies or even like whole domains, but it's not, you can't teach someone how to problem solve. Like that is something that's a muscle that they have to build themselves. So yeah, I feel like it's like a lot of it like shouldn't be topical, like not completely, like you shouldn't, like if you're interviewing for an infrastructure job, you shouldn't be asking people like the nitty gritty of Linux, like stuff that's easily googleable basically. Like you shouldn't be asking questions that people can just find answers to by a simple search. Like we need to conserve our brains for stuff that Google can't do. So yeah, like I feel like a lot of like if you focus on general problem solving rather than specific domains and specific problems within those domains, you get much better outcomes on either side, because you don't let the other person feel completely stupid, and you also find people who are smart and who are capable of grasping things really quickly and capable of learning new things very, very fast.
What are some resources you would recommend for a junior engineer for preparing for an interview in this field?
Mm, Oh, my best recommendation would be reading Designing Data Intensive Applications by Martin Kleppman. It's an excellent book if you want to get started with distributed systems. Like that's how I learned a lot of stuff when I was getting started. And like it's the thing with distributed systems is it's just such a vast field, and there are just way too many rabbit holes that you can go down into, and like each rabbit hole branches out to like infinite rabbit holes themselves. So it can be like a very challenging to figure out like what you're supposed to learn and in what way. Like you need to provide some structure yourself. So yeah, like that book does a really good job of introducing all the basic concepts, and you can sort of go and build your knowledge using that book as a base.
That's great. And as soon as you got your first job, what was something that was surprisingly fun about being on a more back-end focused team?
I think how the thing that was the most surprising was how different it was to front end. Like I know that sounds obvious, but like it's a bit of a transition when you were just doing like JavaScript and then you suddenly start writing services in Go, and the kind of conversations that happen around like design and architecture, like the trade-offs are just fundamentally different when you're working from a back-end perspective rather than a front-end perspective. And yeah, that was super interesting, because those are the kind of conversations I wanted to have and the kind of trade-offs I wanted to make and think about. And that's exactly what I got to do.
That's awesome. And I want to touch on a slightly controversial subject, on call. Oh, we hear a lot at SREcon about when on call goes bad and toxic on call culture. But what was your experience as someone brand new to this field and hopefully a much better on-call culture than we had 15 or 20 years ago?
So yeah, on call is a super interesting topic, and that's something that just incident management as general is something that fascinates me a lot because of like the technical and the human aspects of it and how they are closely intertwined. And yeah, so for on call, like I was actually a little excited because I'd never really been on call ever. Like at one of my jobs, like the on call experience was just really bizarre. They just asked people to go on call for like 12 different systems that they had never really worked on and had no idea about. And like on call consisted of like deployments rather than actually resolving incidents. So I was a little scared after that experience, and I was just like, I don't know what to expect from on call. Like, is it how this is usually? But then I learned more about on call at my previous employer, and it was fascinating. Like, just I used to actively participate in different kinds of incidents as they were happening, and just seeing people, like all hands on deck, like to solve a problem was really really fascinating. So the setup at my previous employer was that we had two on-call rotas. One was a primary rota and one was a shadow rota. So the idea was that primary was staffed by people who were fairly experienced and who were comfortable leading an incident, and shadow rota was staffed by people who wanted to eventually be in that position and were not very comfortable leading incidents, but they wanted to learn. So yeah, so that's why you shadowed the folks on the primary rota to learn more, and then once you got comfortable, then you were promoted to the primary rota. So I really liked that setup because on call can be extremely daunting, and it's just like you don't want to end up in a situation where you're responsible for a lot of people not having a great experience with your service and you're the only one there to fix it. So I think the main thing with on call should always be that you should not let any single engineer feel like they are responsible for fixing the whole thing. Like it has to be a team effort, and that's true in all ways. Like it's not just about fixing a problem, it's also about making, like it's also about causing an incident. Like it's never one person's fault, it's always like a chain of events. We might or might not track all of them back down to the very root of them, but that's how it usually unfolds. But what we see is like the final lever that maybe one or two people pull, which causes this tiny or big explosion depending on the situation. So yeah, I think having a blameless culture where there is that, like the focus is not on finger pointing and of actually solving problems is super useful. And like having this mentorship setup where people who want to experiment but don't want to be responsible for everything all by themselves is also really really useful.
That's great. And I feel like that's something that most people could set up right now at their companies to help onboard people.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it was a great way to onboard people, and even like people who were a little hesitant, when you know that there is someone else who has your back, like that just goes a really long way in helping them get more and more confident. And like everyone learns at their own pace, so like we did not have like specific time limits that like you need to go to the primary rota by like a year. That wasn't the case. So yeah, that was really really useful, and you gradually learn and you gain more confidence, and you see a lot of like stuff I learned about incidents was just by watching other people do stuff and like asking questions. And like you need to make sure that you're not like disturbing someone in the middle of solving a problem and you're asking questions. But yeah, you like most people are very very happy to answer questions about how they went about an investigation later on. So that is something I really enjoyed, like just getting into the nitty gritty of like, okay, what exactly happened and like what was the timeline, and like attending debriefs. And just by being a spectator that you and a fly on the wall, you can learn so much and absorb so much.
yeah. And I really feel like that's something that sometimes we forget, that debriefs can be just as important as solving the issue because that's how we disseminate the knowledge and prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, exactly. I like this is something I've been thinking about a lot. And like from my perspective, like on call isn't like reliability isn't just about on call. Like on call is just one sort of stopgap solution of uncovering the underlying problems that your system has and bubbling them over to a layer where they can actually be addressed.
It's great. What other resources were helpful for you at companies when you were starting out?
Yeah, I think so. The biggest thing that helped me get comfortable was a strong sense of psychological safety. To not feel that I was constantly being judged, and like I could. So the other thing that I don't know if this would go in the resources section, but it like just being able to reach out to experts in specific domains and being able to just pick their brain and talk about something at length is super valuable. Like you don't realize it initially when you're just starting out, but then yeah, when you're like stuck debugging something really weird and you just have someone like an email away that you can just ask, okay, yeah, this is what I'm doing and I'm stuck, and could you please like give some suggestions? That's super duper useful too.
That's great. So, what can the senior SREs in the audience do, right today to help bring more junior engineers in?
I think the first thing that they can do is trust them. That doesn't mean that you need to trust them with your root password, but you just need to trust them to be competent people who can learn and grow just like you did. I feel like in tech, we have a tendency to forget where we are coming from, and that we were all like asking stupid questions or like not understanding stuff and feeling lost a lot of times when we were starting out, and we just completely forget that, and we sort of don't have that empathetic connection to other people who are in that position that we were once in. And if we could just sort of call in on ourselves to bring that back a little more, I think that would go a long way. And like, there's a great talk from one of the previous SREcons about having junior engineers on like platform infrastructure teams by Kate Taggart that I really recommend everyone watch. But it also talks about like having people like that on your team just gives you a fresh set of eyes that you didn't even know you needed or wanted. Because like a lot of people in infrastructure are very jaded sometimes because of like the kind of problems that we have to deal with and the number of times you have to deal with, and like just by being in the field for like so long, and it can just be very refreshing to have someone who's like new to all this and who's super excited about learning a bunch of stuff, and yeah, and who just wants to bounce off ideas off of you that you probably didn't even know, like didn't even think of.
Yeah. Are there any other unique benefits that junior SREs bring to a team versus bringing someone in who has a lot of experience?
I think the biggest benefit is that they don't have a lot of very strong opinions. Like it can be very hard to shake strongly held opinions by like industry veterans, like people who've been here for like a decade or longer. Like they have strong opinions, yes, for a good reason, but like oftentimes they can get very caught up in that and like completely fail to consider what the other person might be saying. I think like people who don't have a lot of experience are really great with that because they're open to learning, they're still sort of forming their opinions, and so yeah, like they can just throw something completely random out there because they don't really know whether it's feasible or not. Like that's what they're trying to learn, and it might just be a good solution. So yeah, that is something that I personally really enjoy, like just having that fresh perspective from someone who isn't completely jaded by all the fires that they have been fighting over the years in their career is just super nice and fascinating.
All right, before we go, are there any other resources that you want to call out for people transitioning into this field?
So I have looked a lot, but weirdly enough, I haven't found a lot of resources. I haven't found a lot of resources which cater to this particular sort of group of people. So there are some ideas that I'm playing around with in my head so far that I really want to bring to life to sort of solve this problem. Because I feel like, yes, there are distributed systems books and whatnot, but yeah, like a lot of resources in this space of all kinds assume a lot of prior knowledge, and they're sort of written with a certain kind of reader in mind, a person who already has prior working experience and knowledge of this field. So it's really hard for someone to get started from scratch, because again it leads to that rabbit hole problem that I described earlier, because you just keep jumping around from one thing to the other, because you start reading one thing and you realize you don't know five other concepts that they mention, and you keep repeating that and you're just like, what am I even trying to do? So yeah, I think that's a problem that we as a community need to come together to solve, to make sure that we so my philosophy of working in tech in general and being the kind of person I am is that we need to open doors as we pass through them. So I would really urge everyone who already is established in this field and is who are a couple of years into their careers in this domain to help other people and to break down barriers for them. And that can take, like, that can be in a lot that can be done in a lot of ways. It can be like by mentoring someone, by providing them career advice. So I think I diverged from the previous bit completely. I should really finish that off before jumping into this classic. So okay, yeah. So yeah, so something that we need to do is come together as an industry, as a community, and help other people, and like create resources that are easy to digest, even if you don't have a lot of prior experience. So something I really want to do is sort of curate or maybe even write a list of like beginner articles like that, which people can just consume without having a lot of prior context or experience, and eventually like create like a library of sorts. So, yeah, and the other thing that I have noticed a lot is that there aren't a lot of people who are talking about being in this field, especially about how they got started. Because in my experience, based on like whoever I've spoken to, either they got started by complete accident or they were just thrown into it randomly. Like someone like left the infrastructure team and there was no one else to take that position. So they were just thrown into the fire and expected to deal with it. And they realized that they thrive in that environment and they enjoy it. So they stuck around. So it feels like there isn't a lot of deliberate effort to bring people into this field. And yeah, and that is something I think that we need to address. And a great way of doing that would be by sharing more stories and by mentoring people, by having one-to-one career conversations and sharing your career journey with people just getting started and letting them know that yes, like people like that exist. Like I don't want people to go through 3 years of college thinking that the only job that they have after they're done is that of a web developer, because there is just so much exciting work happening in like all sorts of fields. Like we need to give people the option to make the best choice and the most informed decision that they can about their career. And yeah, I feel like we as a community can do a lot better there.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your advice and resources.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great fun.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.